So if you've been a little unclear as to why you're seeing that knee valgus when your patient or client is squatting, or you want to really understand how to fix the source and not the symptom, then this video is for you. Make sure you stick around. We're going to go over 4 steps so you can really understand knee valgus and then specific strategies that you can implement with your patients and clients. So step 1. We first need to understand normal squatting biomechanics and the functional definition of internal rotation. Now I'm going to briefly go over some of these concepts, but if you are interested, we go over this in much more detail in the Performance Redefined course. So when it comes to squatting, the human body has a pattern that it moves through, and that pattern is external rotation, internal rotation, and back to external rotation. Here's what that functionally means. That means the body needs to create space to produce power and then create space to produce power. This is our natural mechanism as to how we move. So as we're going into the descending portion of the squat, we have this reciprocating pattern. So from approximately 0 to 60 degrees of hip flexion, we're going to have an ER bias. From 60 to about 90, we're going to have an IR bias. And this happens because of the reorientation of fibers in this posterior lower pelvis. And then from 90 to what we would call normal, 120, we have a reintroduction of external rotation. So now we understand the normal reciprocating pattern. Now, how do we really define internal rotation? Well, we already talked about how it produces power. But functionally, what it's going to do is it's going to appear as a femur that is more in an IR position, which is going to be in this internally rotated state relative to potentially the pelvis, but definitely the tibia. So now we understand hip flexion biomechanics, which can now take us to step number 2, and that is identifying the source. 9 times out of 10, the source of the dysfunction is from the pelvis. The symptom is the femur or the knee valgus that you're looking at. Here's the thing, when we just try to fix the symptom, you may get some relief here. But if the foundation of the human body, is in a faulty position, you don't change the source. This is going to be synonymous with a short-term relief, but not satisfying or getting that long-term gain. In actuality, what we need to do is recognize and make sure we're not getting tunnel vision and just focusing at the knee because that's what you see. But take a step back. Start to really look at the whole body and understand that the foundation is probably causing the femur or the knee to collapse in. Here's the cool thing. When you fix the source, you'll always fix the symptom. Think of it like a house. If you have a second floor problem because of a faulty foundation, you could fix the second floor, but you're gonna still have the faulty foundation, which is going to make the problem come back. However, if you recognize that maybe that second floor is not the problem, maybe the femur is not the problem, let's take a step back. It may take a little bit more time, but it's going to give you the long-term solution. Let's fix the foundation of the house. Let's fix the foundation of the human body, so that we can have the long-term gain, the long-term success, and make sure that this doesn't come back. So now that we've identified the source, we're now at step 3, which is comprehending the source. So like we said, the knee or the femur is usually going to be the symptom. The source is the pelvis. So what we need to do is we need to understand, why is this happening and what do we do about it? So it comes down to poor postures and patterns, and they really present in 2 opposite extreme motions. But if we take a step back for a second and we start to look at hip flexion biomechanics, we talked about the ER, IR, ER reciprocating pattern, right? What we have to realize is that we need that to happen and occur at the pelvis. So we need this nice ER, IR, ER motion, which is going to allow a nice vertical movement where everything stays in a relatively straight plane. If your patient or client doesn't have the ability to dissociate, the femur will force things. That forced position is going to drive the formal knee valgus. So when we are considering these postures and patterns, we need to understand that the normal would be a pattern in movement coming through here, not just forcing through here. So the first posture is that of an anterior pelvic tilt. These are those individuals that are more in the arched back position. They're going to be the ones that typically have their butt sticking out. What's going on here? Well, we're going to get a little biomechanical, but all you need to think about is that this posture is contributing to a position or biased position of knee valgus. So if we break it down really quick, we can start to see that in order to have that arched back position, right, an increase in that lumbar lordosis, the sacrum has to be in a more nutated position. So that is the forward positioning of the sacrum. From here, that is going to be coupled with the innominate bones moving into internal rotation, adduction, and extension. Okay? Now, for this video's purpose, understand nutation is going to start to tip forward. If you really want to dive deep, again, the Performance Redefined course will give you the answers that you're looking for. Now, what is that going to do? The big picture here, it's going to antevert the acetabulum. This anterior position and orientation of the innominate bones moving in is going to drive internal rotation. So this person is just in a starting position of internal rotation. That is going to give them a lot of leverage and a lot of bias to produce internal rotation. Well, what's going to happen from there? They're going to want to go into that knee valgus position because that's the position they're in. These people are going to need to learn opposite positions to get them in a better starting position. So, first takeaway here is that the position of an anterior pelvic tilt is going to drive internal rotation and create someone to just naturally move through there because they only have a very limited movement excursion available. The second types of individuals are those on the other end. Instead of these sticking the butt out, these people are tucking the butt under. They're the no butt syndromes. What's happening here? Well, the pattern and posture is a little bit different. They're in more of what's called a counter nutation state. That's when the sacrum tips posteriorly. That's going to be met with external rotation, abduction, and flexion. A lot of times these individuals will actually bring their knees into that valgus position because they can't dissociate. Their pelvis doesn't have the ability to drive from that 60 to 90 degree mark like we talked about into that IR state. And when that happens, they're forced with really trying to drive the femur into that internally rotated state. But because the pelvis remains in more this ER position, you have that visual of knee valgus. So what are they trying to do, right? Think about, why would someone want to do that, right? Doesn't that look like it hurts the knees? Well, they're trying to pick up power. These people are biased into a position that makes it easy to find space. So they have no problem kind of moving in that desired squat form, but they really struggle to find that power. So they need to really drive inward to try to find that. And it's going to really stick out visually because if the pelvis is more out, and once those knees or the femurs drive in to pick up leverage, that's when we start to see that. So now we understand that different patterns and postures are going to bias certain people to do certain things. Some people are starting there, and that's just where they're going to be because that's where they're conditioned to be. And some people are in the opposite range, and they need to try to pick up some internal rotation, so they do the best they can by driving their femurs in. Now again, the big takeaway is we can't just think and assume that they have weak glutes because maybe they're just in that starting position that they are in a weak position, or they're in a position that they have strong glutes, but they can't utilize them because they need internal rotation from that 60 to 90 degree mark to pick up some power. So what do we need to do? Well, for our anterior pelvic tilt individuals, think about it. What's the problem? They're too far anterior, which is driving them in a internally rotated state. We need to work on getting these individuals back. So we need to get them to understand how to tuck their pelvis, how to go into more of a posterior pelvic tilt, how to pick up some hamstrings so they can work on tucking and into that pelvic tilt. So any sort of 90-90 position, any sort of posterior pelvic tilt is going to be really beneficial for them so that they don't fall into that knee valgus during the squat. What about for our posterior pelvic tilt individuals? They are on the opposite end. We talked about the external rotation measures and how they're trying to drive into IR. Well, they're really good at ER, they're not so good at IR, so we need to pick up on some IR strategies. What I would work on with them is something in a half kneeling position where they're reaching. You could think of a lunging position, right? Anytime you're turning towards that front leg, you're working on that IR, right? We're at that 60 to 90 degree mark, and we're working on IR. The nice thing about this is when you go into a split stance activity, you're going to start to allow the pelvis to move a little bit more. And that movement is going to be really good to then recapture during your bilateral movements, such as a squat. I hope you found that valuable. Let's go through a brief recap on some of the big key takeaways. What I want you to think about is that the next time you see knee valgus, I want you to question it. Is it really a knee problem, or is it more of a foundational problem? And then I want you to think about, how is that person postured or patterned? The way that they are postured or patterned, is that driving IR from a position or a weakness standpoint, right? Are they in more of an anterior pelvic tilt or a posterior pelvic tilt? And from there, if they're in an anterior pelvic tilt, we need to work on getting these individuals back before we really start doing a lot of these more advanced level things. And someone that's more in that posterior pelvic tilt direction, they need to work on strategies on improving IR.